the federal government tried to put BYU pressure. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Following the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the federal government tried to put pressure on BYU and the LDS Church over racial issues. They opened up a civil rights investigation to find out if BYU was in compliance with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We'll find out the results of that investigation with Dr. Matt Harris, so you won't want to miss this conversation. I also want to mention, if you're into civil rights, there's a great podcast as part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. Beyond the Block seeks to center the narratives of the marginalized in conversations on Mormonism. A black lifelong member and queer theologian, Brother Jones and Brother Knox, seek to fill the gaps between Mormon theology and Mormon culture, that people of all kinds of identities may claim a seat at the table of Christ. So if you want to know more about them, check them out. They're part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, so check that out. Now back to our conversation.
So we can come back to the civil rights thing. You want to do that for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. So just a couple of the timeline's important. So April of '68 is when they mail a civil rights letter, the letter to President Wilkinson. This is the Office of Civil Rights in Denver, Colorado. They're an arm of the Justice Department. And just a little context here, the Lyndon Johnson administration in the 60s decides that they're going to go after private high schools and universities that discriminate against African Americans. So that's a priority for the Justice Department in the Lyndon Johnson administration. And he's the same president who gets the Civil Rights Act through. It starts with Jack Kennedy, but Lyndon Johnson gets it passed.
Right.
Anyway, we give Johnson credit, and he deserves a lot of the credit, but it's President Kennedy's baby. He's the one that germinates with him. Anyway, so Johnson recognizes that the Civil Rights Act doesn't mean anything unless you hold people accountable. And Title VI, there's several provisions of the Civil Rights Act, but one of the provisions is that if universities are receiving federal funds, they need to fall into line. And BYU had been receiving government grants for research, Pell Grants for students. Students, of course, after World War II, they're using the GI Bill. And so BYU has its hands in the federal pot, if you will. And much to the chagrin of Ezra Taft Benson and some others. It's another whole story. Because President Elder Benson thought that if the government if BYU didn't take any government funds, and they can do whatever they wanted to do. And of course, that's not how it works. The government can do whatever it wants to do and find a way to do it legally, right? The Commerce Clause and some other things. But anyway, so the BYU had been receiving some federal funds and so forth. So the Johnson administration, they go after them. They notice that they have a couple of African Americans, and they haven't had a long history of African Americans there. And then there's a priesthood ban in place, and that's the perfect storm for discrimination. So they send them this letter, April of '68. Wilkinson panics. What do we do? Because he knows they discriminate. And in May of '68, they come to BYU, 5 of them from Denver. They're all lawyers, of course. And they scour over the promotional literature and all of that stuff. And they really hammer Wilkinson. You have this robust Native American population. Why is it you don't have more black people, or Negroes as they used in those days? And of course, the civil rights guys, they don't understand the special emphasis of Native Americans in Mormonism. Elder Kimball's baby. He's the apostle that made reaching out to the Lamanites his focus at the time. So anyway, by June of 1968, they write Wilkinson a letter after the site visit, and they let him know, you're in violation of the Civil Rights Act, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1965. In order for you to follow the compliance, we have 8 things you need to do. And they gave him, I think, 8 other suggestions. And I'm not going to go...
So 16 total.
Yeah, it's like 16 total. 8 you have to do, 8 we just suggest. And I'll just go through, of the 8 that you have to do, I'll just go through the 2 or 3 most salient ones real quick. One of them is that you need to have a statement of non-discrimination in your promotional literature, and you need to reach out to your alum and also local businesses saying that you don't discriminate. And Wilkinson says, yeah, no problem, we can do that. You must recruit in African American communities where there's 25% more black people in those communities. Ooh, can't do that. And let's see, what else? Oh, you can't discriminate in housing. If they come to BYU, you have to put them up. You can't have a black...
No segregation.
Segregated dorms, yeah. But it was and you must recruit black faculty. No, can't do that. And so those are the two big sticky ones, is the black faculty, the black students.
Is he saying, no, we're not going to recruit black faculty?
No. I'm hamming it up a little bit. No, he's not in a position to say one way or the other until he meets with the board.
Okay.
Now,
but he doesn't want to, is what you're saying, essentially.
No, he doesn't want to. He's caught in a precarious position. He knows the authority of the federal government. And by the way, I should tell you, there's case law going on. He's a lawyer. Lawyers work off of precedent. He knows that if it ever went to court, that if BYU were to sue the federal government for violation of their religious rights, they would lose. He knows this because it's going on during that time. Some Christian universities that are suing or schools that are suing are losing. So there's case law that's being built up in favor of the Justice Department. So, so he knows what's going on, and he knows if it goes to court, he's going to lose. But he has the board, and the board of trustees are comprised of the apostles. Most of them are apostles. And these guys most of them are conservative, and they don't like being told what to do. And they don't...
Especially Benson.
Oh, my goodness. And so the federal government telling them how to run their school, that is just way too much for them. And Harold Lee is another one. How dare they tell us what faculty to hire? He says that. And we'll shut this place down if we ever have a Negro student, he says. I mean, they're defiant, they're belligerent. And so poor Wilkinson is caught right in the middle of the civil rights investigation and also this recalcitrant board that doesn't want to be told what to do. And anyway,
And now sports protests, too.
And now we've got the sports protest, and we're going to kick you out of the conference, by the way. It's like the perfect storm. And so the long story short is that Wilkinson ignores the letter for several months, and they write him, this is serious. Wilkinson writes back, what do you want me to do? I can't get it on their agenda. They don't even want to talk about it. It's kind of like, we'll just ignore it, it'll go away. And Wilkinson can...
Wow. Well, boy, we sure went dark there. You're like a silhouette now. Yeah. That was right at a good time, too. All right, so for those of you who are watching at home, you may notice a change of scenery. The power went out, and so we're taking advantage of the window that we were sitting in front of. But that's why we moved. So we were talking about President Wilkinson's getting it from everywhere, basically.
Yeah, so I think we left off with he was waiting to hear back from the board about how to address these civil rights suggestions. And the board had dithered and delayed. And anyway, by December of 1968, 7 months after the initial letter, Wilkinson finally got back to the civil rights people. And he said, we'll put we'll make the suggestions in our promotion literature that we don't discriminate. We'll let our alumni know. We'll let jobs or businesses in the Provo area know. But we're not going to recruit black students, nor are we going to recruit black faculty. And the civil rights people were upset that he was being so defiant.
Wow, so he actually did tell them.
He tells them this. And so they put more pressure on him, and they tell him that we're going to do another site visit. And if you don't fall into line, they expressed this to Wilkinson's former law partner, a guy named Barker, who was, I think Wilkinson was still a partner with him, even at BYU. He was still on the name of the law firm in Washington, D.C. But anyway, BYU had hired that law firm to work with him on this. And the civil rights team lets Barker and some of his fellow lawyers know that BYU students will no longer be able to use their GI Bills there. They will no longer receive federal funds there. The faculty can't receive federal funds, and ultimately they'll lose accreditation. And so,
that's a big one, accreditation.
Oh yeah, and Robert Thomas, the vice president of BYU, so he's one of the top lieutenants of Wilkinson. He says, if we can't have students on the GI Bill here, if our faculty lose their federal research funds, and if we lose our accreditation, we're done. I mean, he spells out very clearly, you need to talk to the board and tell them what's at stake. And so he goes back to the board, Wilkinson, and they reach a compromise. They say, with the faculty, we're not going to recruit black students, Wilkinson tells the investigators, but we won't discriminate against black faculty, LDS faculty, if they apply. Which is kind of comical. I mean, how many PhD black Latter-day Saints exist in the 60s, right? But anyway, that's what he says. And he says, and I want you to know, Wilkinson tells the civil rights guy, a guy named Bach, I want you to know, Mr. Bach, that we've been trying to recruit black students. We're sending out letters to students in Wyoming and Utah. And,
a lot of blacks there.
Well, that's really, I mean, remember what the original letter said, that you have to recruit.
Well, I was going to ask you about that.
That you have to recruit in population centers of 20% or more African Americans.
Well, what about the letter that they were sending out saying, yeah, Mr. Black guy, you're not going to like it here. You can't date anybody. There's no blacks in
Provo.
Provo.
Never shares that with the civil rights people.
I was going to say.
Oh, no.
And they didn't find out any other thing? Okay.
No. See, that's the difference between Bob Jones and BYU. BYU, they were clever and subtle about it. Bob Jones is just right there on the front page of their promo. They put their views out there. But Wilkinson was far more clever to do that.
Okay.
And arguably, that's what got him off the hook by not doing that. But they were discriminatory. In spite of Wilkinson saying they weren't, he knew they were. He admitted in private they were discriminating towards black students. And if they find out, we're in trouble. This is what he says. Anyway, so the civil rights team gives them a pat, clears them. In the spring of 1969, a year after the initial site visit, says you're in compliance with Section 6. Sends them a letter.
Really?
Yeah.
So from 68 to 69, they went from out of compliance to in compliance.
Yep, because sends them a letter because he had been trying to make a good faith effort in Wyoming and Utah, sending these letters to
There's
black
not
students.
20% in any.
I know. Clearly the civil rights team is, not playing hardball, at least quite yet. But
wow.
But they left the door open, though. It wasn't a judicial victory lap by any means, even though Wilkinson took this letter for all it's worth and all the universities protesting, we're in compliance, look at this letter. And they published it in newspapers. In every city where they were protesting, they would publish a civil rights, BYU and civil rights, a little placard, and it had snippets of the letter from the civil rights team saying they're in compliance. However, Wilkinson knew that they were not out of the woods because as long as they kept the numbers low, black students low, that there's always going to be a source of contention there. Also, Bach said, even though you're in compliance, we still want to know how you're going to handle the Negro faculty issue. So they separated the two issues, strangely enough. I don't know why they did that, but they did. We want to know how you're going to do that. And this is a big source of contention because Wilkinson, they didn't want to recruit black students or black faculty. And with the numbers being so low, they didn't have black Latter-day Saints with PhDs. And so really what that meant was if they were to bring in black faculty, it would have to be persons not of the LDS faith with PhDs. And that was a no-no. And so the compromise was that they wouldn't discriminate against black Latter-day Saint faculty if they existed, and they would bring faculty, non-Mormon black faculty lecturers to campus, but limit them to 2 per year. Couldn't have more than 2.
BYU was limiting this.
BYU was limiting this. And so the earliest black folk that they brought in who were not Latter-day Saints, one was Edward Brooke, the conservative Massachusetts senator. They brought him in, very conservative black man from Massachusetts. They brought in a very conservative Baptist preacher. They invited, although he declined at the time, they invited Alex Haley of Roots fame.
Wow.
And the controversial one that they chose, and they did it strategically, they invited Roy Wilkins, who was president of the NAACP. And there was a lot of discussion about bringing him in based on who he worked for.
Right.
And of course, the NAACP, Elder Benson had called them a communist organization. And they were, of course, at the forefront of the civil rights movement. And so BYU thought that this will work in our favor if we bring them in. Robert Thomas said, quote, it'll be good for general accreditation if we bring them in. But what was interesting is we can't just bring them in because what you don't want is to bring them in and then give them a nice large platform for you to criticize the church. They're, woo, don't do that. And I mean, can you blame them, right? So, so they read a piece that Wilkinson had written in the New York Times called Mormons and the Negro. And Robert Thomas had read it. And he told Wilkinson, he said, look, I think it'll be okay if we bring him in. This is a pretty moderate piece. Share it with the brethren. And they did. And so he got approved. And I don't think Wilkins, I'm pretty sure he didn't come. They turned him down. But anyway, they invited him nonetheless. And so they limited it to 2 per year. They hired the first black faculty member at BYU in the summer of 1970, a recent convert named Wynetta Martin. And she was hired to work with nurses in the nursing faculty. And she wrote a book, by the way. You can read the book's online.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. And there's a chapter about her time at BYU. It's kind of interesting. As the first black faculty member. She's also the first black member of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. So
now, is she just a lecturer? So she hasn't received tenure or anything. This is just like a temporary 1-year position. Is that right?
Good question. I don't think so.
I mean, because that's the other thing that first comes into mind. And I guess we're getting into a little academia here, but tenure is a big deal in a university. And so the fact that BYU is making this concession, okay, we'll hire these 4 lecturers. In my mind, I'm hearing these are 1-year temporary positions. Why would that even matter to the accreditation people? I mean, it was good that they have black people. I get that.
Yeah.
But if these are temporary positions in a year they're gone, and is this just going to be a rollover position?
Well, I don't know if Wynetta Martin is on the tenure track or if she's a lecturer. I don't know that. Okay. I do know that the second person they bring in is a graduate assistant from Nigeria, I think in the sociology department. So that clearly would be temporary, a graduate assistant in the Soc. I think she's full-time. And whether she was, I don't recall if she was a full-time nursing faculty or if hers was an administrative, but she was called in to work with, to teach the church, or to teach students about the Negro. Uh-huh. And she says that in her memoir. I was asked to inform them about Negroes. And as you can imagine, these white kids at BYU have never been around black people before.
Oh, yeah.
And so they had all kinds of questions about her hair, her culture, her, all of this stuff. And she took it in good stride, at least according to her book. But she was asked, would you change your skin color if you could? One of her students asked her that. And she responded by saying, oh, the good Lord made me who I am, and if my skin color changes, then he's going to have to be the one to have to do it. She's kind of saying that tongue-in-cheek. But this is the kind of stuff she's dealing with. Old shards of Mormon racial doctrine from the Book of Mormon about curses and, through righteous living and all of that your skin could become lighter. And even though that applies to Native Americans or Lamanites in the Book of Mormon, of course, black people read themselves into that as well. And they're very curious about how those curses relate to them personally. And so, anyway, I won't go into this, but there's been a long-standing Mormon teaching that, through righteous living and conversion, either in this life or in the afterlife, your skin will be lighter or white. It stands to reason if you have a cursed skin, the curse will be lifted one day, and you'll be back to your primitive color of whiteness. And not all of the early brethren taught that, but some did. And some of those old shards will come through well into the 1980s and 90s.
I wouldn't call those old shards. I think those old shards are still in the church.
Well, it's never been forcefully repudiated. I mean, the church graciously mercifully, I should say, has repudiated the curse of Cain doctrine, the interracial marriage piece, and this idea that our black brothers and sisters were unrighteous in the premortal life. So the Race and Priesthood document the church published in 2013 did that. But
that depends on you reading the Gospel Topics essays, and I don't know that a lot of people have.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, that part I don't think is ambiguous. There are some other ambiguities in that document about the origins of the ban. I mean, smart people can read different things about the origins, but the church condemning those past teachings, I think, is pretty unequivocal. But it doesn't say anything about this whole skin pigmentation doctrine that's changed. And anyway, so that doctrine, when it's not been repudiated, it's kept alive. And even the curse stuff is still alive in some quarters among older Latter-day Saints who, like you said, haven't read the Race and Priesthood document. But what's beautiful about that document is that when somebody is circulating the old racial teachings, then somebody in church can hold the document up and say, no, that's not what we teach anymore. Here's a statement from the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 that's on LDS.org. So I think it's an authoritative go-to, if you will, when somebody teaches these old racial views that are no longer in vogue in the church. But anyway, so the first African American was hired in 1970 when Etta Martin. And I don't think she stayed long. And I'm not sure why. I don't recall in the book why she left. And unfortunately, she passed away in 2000, so I haven't been able to obviously interview her. So,
Well, I just wonder, and I hate to get too academic on people, but there's I'm an adjunct, you're a tenured professor. I don't want to say that there's a two-tiered system, but there's a two-tiered system in academia.
Yeah.
And I would think that an accreditation committee would look into this. When I hear you say lecturer, I'm hearing that's a 1-year temporary position.
Well, let me be clear. I don't want to misspeak. I don't know if she was a lecturer. I need to look. I can get back to you on that. I don't know her official status. Was she tenure track? Was she admin? If she was completely admin, then that means she's at will. I don't think she would have been admin, but she did have a supervisory role over something with nurses, so I don't know the details.
Well, and I just wonder, because I know with any university, and I've worked for several, to be honest, that you need to have a certain number of PhDs and a certain number of masters or whatever.
Yeah.
And because I've also worked at Western Governors University, and there for a while they were like, we're not hiring anybody unless they have a PhD. So I know that accreditation requires certain things, and maybe things were different in '69 when they were doing this accreditation audit or whatever it was. But I would think personally, if I were on the accreditation committee, some people get really hung up on that language, but you would need to have, if we want to have more black faculty, I would think they should be tenure track faculty in order to maintain accreditation standards, but maybe not.
I would agree with you, and you didn't bring up her degrees. I think she just held the master's. However, and don't quote me on this, I don't think that there was a terminal PhD in nursing in the early 70s.
Oh.
Today there is.
Well, but just university-wide, you'd need a certain number, wouldn't you?
No, what they do is they look at what is the terminal degree in your field. If the terminal degree in nursing is a Master of Nursing, that's the terminal degree.
And that's good enough.
That's good enough. Like today, the only one that I can think of today that has a terminal degree that's not a PhD would be a Master of Fine Arts. So if you go to a university and you teach creative writing, they'll hire you with an MFA.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some PhD programs in creative writing, I'm told, but an MFA is still acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah, the University of Iowa, for example, is one of the best creative writing programs in the country, and they have MFAs on the faculty.
Okay.
Yeah, nursing, I know our faculty in our nursing, they all have PhDs, but back in the day, I don't think a lot of nurses had PhDs.
Well, and you don't get that in STEM fields either. You have to have a PhD.
Yeah, well,
in
STEM's a terminal degree has always been a PhD in the STEMs, as far as in history too. I mean, they've been offering doctoral degrees in history since the late 19th century when universities professionalized with the PhD.
Okay.
So.
Well, sorry for that little.
No, that's okay.
There.
It's worth knowing though what her status was.
Yeah.
And also worth knowing, which I don't know the answer to. I'd be curious to know how many African American faculty they've had at BYU over the years. I do know, for whatever it's worth, at least I'm told, I haven't verified this, but I'm told that last academic year at BYU they had 3 black faculty.
So they've improved a lot, huh?
Well, I mean, that's still not good.
I know.
And I know from some of my friends at BYU that they would love to have more black faculty for a lot of reasons, not just accreditation reasons, but diversity is a real and meaningful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just not a lot of black saints in the church.
We don't have a lot of black apostles either.
No, not a lot of black apostles. Although, didn't we just the more recent general authority, first African American, right?
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember what his name was. I don't remember.
Peter something. Gosh, can't remember his name. But he was a faculty member, I think, in the BYU Business School. He's at BYU for a while, and then I think he went to Cedar City, Southern Utah, to teach. And then when he was called in as a general authority, I think he was somewhere in the South teaching. So Yeah, but they're few and far between.
So they still have it. I mean, it just highlights the problem. It's hard to get black athletes at BYU. It's hard to get black faculty, and this has not really changed since the 60s. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yeah. No, the black student body has not. If you look at the percentage of black students at BYU in proportion to the student body, it's always been less than 3%. I don't know of any time when it's been above 3%.
And most of them were on the football team, right?
Most of them were, well, it's true. A lot of them played sports, and especially in the 70s when they first came. I mean, I should tell you too, when Wilkinson said in November of 1969, when the board gives approval finally to recruit black students and give them athletic scholarships like white students, the civil rights people, they want a detailed list of who you're giving the athletes to, who you're recruiting. I mean, they're very detailed. They're not letting BYU off the hook at all. And so Wilkinson asks his lieutenant, his name was Heber Woolsey, who was the director of, I think, communications at the time. And he said, I need a list from you of all the black athletes that football and basketball are coaching or recruiting. So they went to Stan Watts, the football coach. They went to, it would have been Liddell Anderson or Frank Arnold. Gosh, Frank Arnold, I think, at the time. Liddell was later.
Yeah, Liddell was later. Yeah.
Liddell was later. So I went to Frank Arnold, and they had to produce. Who were you reaching out to? Who were you contacting? And it wasn't just because Wilkinson was curious. He had to turn those names over to the civil rights people. So there was accountability. What's interesting about this story is that if you read some Mormon scholarship, it's really quite good. I recommend it, and I think it's sound stuff. But you read the stuff about the riots, the athletic protests, and there's been some fine work done on that. But it's kind of an afterthought. Oh yeah, and BYU started recruiting his first black students in 1970. Like, wait, that didn't happen in a vacuum. They didn't do this willingly. They did this because they had to. They were going to get kicked out of the conference, and the civil rights team was just breathing down their throats. And so I think that's important, that they just didn't want to do it because of this idea of interracial marriage.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Matt Harris. In our next conversation, I was surprised to learn that BYU almost didn't get accreditation on their law school.
Nonetheless, there's new law school popping up, and the American Bar Association, they send a letter to Dallin H. Oaks, this brand new president. He's a young man. He's just left his tenured position at the University of Chicago, where he went to school and then subsequently joined their law faculty. And BYU recruited him to replace Wilkinson. So in 1971, Dallin Oaks comes on board, and Oaks receives this letter. Oh my gosh, they're not going to accredit us. They're threatening to not accredit us because of the church's policy towards blacks. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com, and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.